Kiñca yathābhūtaṃ pajānāti. And what? In English, we would have to put the word and first, but in Pali and in Sanskrit, it's never first. It's always going to be post-positive or enclitic. So here it is second, and it's run up against this other word, and it's actually caused this word to undergo a sound change. The ending here would normally be king. If we said king and we took a breath or maybe had a little bit of a pause in cha, I don't think the sound would be affected, but when they're put together, it's just the way they come out. It's just, this is the way it sounds. And Pali, unlike English, the sounds kind of get written down as they sound and not as someone has conceived them. So, for instance, in English, we have cats that ends in an S and dogs that ends in an S, but they don't sound the same at all. And I just throw that out there. That's what happens when your writing comes kind of before sound changes take place. So, Kiñca. Now this king is it's an interrogative, what? And it's neuter. So we don't know by looking at it if it's nominative or accusative. It's singular, neuter. We wouldn't know just if it's running around in the wild all on its own, whether it's nominative or accusative. But we know that we have this verb, pajānāti, and just in this last sentence, the subject of pajānāti was bhikkhu, samahito bhikkhu. So probably the same subject. And that would mean this is actually the accusative. This is the direct object of this verb. And what does, because this is now an interrogative question, the monk or one understand in a deep way as it is? And now the Buddha is going to tell us what this person understands in a deep way as it is. Before we go on, I want to point out, and I didn't color code them, but notice how often yathābhūtaṃ pajānāti comes up. So we've already kind of done the heavy lifting. This is just going to keep coming back. I didn't even count it that many times, but we see it comes back a lot. This is sort of a feature of a lot of especially I think the prose sections of the Pali Suttas. And again, we have to keep in mind these were transmitted orally, and that probably helped aid in understanding and remembering. Now, also before we go on, this is of course the way this is printed or presented in modern editions, but we can sort of make this a little easier on ourselves or on our eyes if we do it like this, because then once we do that, we've set off this this part here. We'll see that there's kind of like 4 bullet points. And so now, as I said before, the Buddha is going to tell us in more detail what this person is going to fill out. What he's going to answer this question, the what. And just something I'll say now, the way this is being presented here is the kind of, if we want to call it the object, but the answer to this question is being put sort of like in a quotation, and that is in Pali, it's being, we find this word ti, and it's marking off like a concept. Sometimes it marks off direct speech, and in a way, it's kind of doing that here, but it can mark off like a word that's going to be defined. It can mark off a concept, and it's also sort of marking off a concept. So I'll explain that in just a minute. So this first one here is Idaṃ dukkha'nti yathābhūtaṃ pajānāti. He understands in a deep way as it is. Idaṃ dukkha'nti. So I think we talked about how the modern edition here has these quotation marks. If these weren't in here, and they wouldn't be in, and they certainly wouldn't have been in older written editions of this, we would get this, Idaṃ dukkha'nti. Now, I just point this out because there's another little sandhi thing happening here. This would actually be dukkha'nti. So these are sort of they're agreeing with each other. This is a demonstrative pronoun, neuter nominative singular, and this word, dukkha'nti, is neuter nominative singular. However, when it's followed by this ti, the changes to n. Not that it just changes to n. It's in kind of the same row. If you ever look at the Sanskrit or Pali, the way the alphabet is presented, that these are in the same row, and that's what's happening. The T is changing this into an un. So anyway, we don't want to get confused about that, and we also don't want to get confused by the fact that there's this. Let me use this one. That this is getting put in there. It might kind of make it look a little weird, but that's all that's going on. I think they want to put it here. If they put it after the n, it might look confusing as to why this n isn't an ung. And I'm sorry about that. That should all have been, I'll try to timestamp that out so that you can skip ahead, or, you'll have some warning. So here, this is just a nominal sentence. This, and we have to understand some form of the verb to be, is, and then dukkha. This is dukkha. And I don't know if it's too far afield to say there is dukkha. Dukkha exists. But I think maybe the Idaṃ, maybe we're kind of pointing to this existence, this body, this existence. Idaṃ dukkha'nti. This is dukkha. I'll just spend a little time on dukkha, and maybe that's all we'll do today, and then the rest of this will go pretty quickly. Dukkha, a good way to understand this is to think about ka as meaning like a hole that would go on, say, a wheel for an axle. Now, if the hole doesn't go in the center, or if it does go in the center where it should go, then you'll have a very smooth ride. If it doesn't go in the center of the wheel, you're going to end up with a very bumpy ride, especially depending on how far off center that hole is. And that is actually sort of what this means. This ka would be a hole, and this de would be like der, but then it picks up this ka sound here. Just means bad, not well, as in not well placed, a poorly placed hole. So I bring that up first because early on, clearly some translators thought that the best word to use to capture dukkha was suffering. And unfortunately, suffering is just too specific of a word. There isn't one English word that can capture the range of dukkha. So bumpy ride gives us a sense of what our life is like. It's never quite that smooth. We could also think of it as being like an ill at easiness. There's always some background, troubling thought. We know, hey, I could lose my job, or what would happen if I really got sick, or I am sick. What happens if I get worse, or my friend is really depressed or upset? I mean, and so on and so forth. There's just so many things that are uncertain in this world that can cause dukkha, and probably cause it even at like the biological level, where like, our amygdala has gotten involved and sort of taken over at certain times, and just makes our life sort of filled with anxiety. That's another way to think of dukkha, not so much suffering. It certainly includes suffering. There is massive amounts of suffering that go on in this world, but we don't want to limit dukkha to simply suffering. And I think when we do that, first of all, people think that, well, the Buddha said that life is just suffering, and that's not, if the Buddha used the word life, he didn't. He would maybe say all things contain this, or just Idaṃ. He used the word dukkha. He did not use the word suffering. So that's something that we should really kind of just think about and meditate on a little bit. And it's really good to come to terms with dukkha. And I just want to plug something here about this. First of all, something that I should have said is this is clearly the first of the four noble truths, or the four truths of the noble ones. And they occur in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and we're going to take that up at some point soon down the road. They're a little more expanded than this. And this is why I was saying earlier that you could think of this in a way as direct speech, because the direct speech would have been the Buddha's, Idaṃ dukkha. This is from another teaching of his. And as I said, it's slightly more spelled out there. So this is kind of an abbreviated form of the first of these truths. They're not called the noble truths here, or the truths of the noble ones. That's a later sort of title given. But what I really want to applaud the Buddha for, or to applaud the Buddha for, is that he starts with us. He doesn't start with the one, and there's an emanation, and there's matter, and matter has corrupted. He doesn't do anything like that. He just starts with the basic fact of our lives, that our lives have this uneasiness about them, and up to and including suffering. And from there, he's able to sort of start to, he wants to put us on a path so that we understand how this arises, and how we understand that there's a cessation, and how to get to that place where dukkha ceases in our life.